Alright everyone, I just decided to make a general omnibus video here for some of the weird shit that Biden voters actually believe in. Both about Biden on one hand and also about Donald Trump actually on the other, and the latter arguably more important. For instance, right now with Trump testing positive for COVID, you get a lot of people trotting out the tired old line, which has never been true, that he called coronavirus a hoax initially. It's interesting that a person can believe this, considering that around the exact same time he was prepping a travel ban, restrictions on travel from China. That would not be generally commensurate. A logical person would not be able to reconcile that kind of considerable action, very considerable, as well as the lead up to acknowledging the validity of a nationwide lockdown on a state-to-state basis, which, by the way, is the only constitutional, quasi-constitutional way to do it under the 10th. Now, you cannot reconcile a person doing that with thinking that the virus does not exist. The real quote, of course, if you read it in context, he's talking about the Democrats hoaxing it up on his response. That is the idea that Trump had failed. It was his responsibility that coronavirus existed or was, spreading in the United States. It was a hoax, essentially. It was a lie. It's never actually happened. Trump was the one taking action at the time, again, not reconciled with reality. He was the one passing travel restrictions. The Democrats were telling you to party in Chinatown, in the most literal sense with Nancy Pelosi. You don't have to take that quote out of context. You can look at the entire context of it, and it's just as damning. Cuomo, Biden, Harris, Warren, all of the big heavy-hitting Democrats initially said it was a nothing burger, it's meaningless, Trump is just being a bigot again. And that is the truth. On Charlottesville, Biden voters still generally appear to believe that he called Nazis very fine people. If you read the entire quote, and he keeps trying to force Biden and other people to acknowledge the subsequent sentence, which is that he explicitly denounced Nazis, communists, and all these other groups that were actually engaged in violent behavior in Charlottesville. The groups he was talking about were the liberal and regular conservative protesters and counter-protesters at the Confederate War Memorial that had already assembled there before anyone with a tiki torch or a black bloc banner showed up. Those groups showed up and became antagonistic. The protesters and counter-protesters, the vast bulk of people physically there, were a bunch of regular college kids and stuff. Some of them had Trump hats. Some of them had Confederate flags. Doesn't make you a Nazi. Other people there were waving Democratic Party banners. These people were just protesting. They weren't engaged in violence. They weren't throwing shit. They weren't throwing rocks. They weren't shooting people, including attacking a police helicopter, I believe, if I remember correctly. Now, that didn't happen. But if you listen to the first sentence of his quote out of context, it sounds like he's calling the Nazis fine people. Well, he didn't. Again, read the next sentence. It's funny how this has been repeated even by the corporate media, despite the fact that it is an objective falsehood. Despite the fact that only in a false alternative reality would that quote actually be true, it is parroted ad nauseum by these corporate groups as though it has relevance. Well, of course, any reasonable person looking at the entire quote understands that what Trump is saying is literally a 180 from what's believed in by the average Biden voter. Try convincing them of that. Even if you show them the quote outright, they won't believe you. You can literally play them a clip of the whole quote. They won't believe you. They are stuck. They have cognitive dissonance because they've been told that Orange Man's bad. Because Orange Man is irredeemably bad, because he's Hitler, because he's evil, they cannot bring themselves to acknowledge even basic reality, even when it is objective and observable reality, because it sounds like you're defending Hitler. I've talked about this. For instance, people claim that Adolf Hitler was a syphilitic, homosexual drug addict, incestuous rapist of children, also had one ball, and other various things. The documentation is generally not there to show that any of these things are true. But if you point that out, people will say, oh my God, you're defending Hitler. Not that, I thought calling people gay isn't a slur anymore because, it's generally tolerable, so I'm not sure why denying Hitler was gay when he was married and had kids and so forth. I'm not sure why that would be considered odd, but that's the claim. Or he was in a sexless marriage, he was married to Germany. That part was kind of true. But most of the claims about him are fantastical. But you're not supposed to point that out because you're defending Hitler. The same is true of Trump, to a greater or lesser degree, depending on who you're talking to. The fact is that if you say, no, Trump did not applaud Nazis, they can't reconcile it in their minds because they've been told that Trump is a Nazi. And so why would a Nazi things? Say that 3 times fast. Why wouldn't they? Of course he did. He defended the Nazis in Charlottesville. Well, no, here's the other part of the quote. He explicitly said that that wasn't who he was applauding. Well, he's still a Nazi. See, they won't acknowledge it. Doesn't matter how many times you bring it up. They will go to their graves believing that Trump, who initially passed a travel ban over the objections of Democrats, thought that the virus was a hoax. And so that's somehow very newsworthy because he's asymptomatic, which it isn't. And Biden fans also believe things about Joe Biden that are clearly, blatantly, objectively, observably, in some cases, false. For instance, number one, I've heard people, and Spencer made this claim literally last night, well, Biden's always been like gawky and he's not quite all there and it's just his speaking style. No, it's not. I can observe. I can look back through speeches that he made in the Senate, speeches that he made certainly up until the last couple of years, maybe the Obama presidency, and he's a different person than he is today. His speaking skills have deteriorated to a considerable degree in the cognitive sense. I can observe this. I can look at hundreds of hours of footage of Joe Biden talking in interviews, in Congress, making speeches on the campaign trail for Obama, for himself, for other candidates, throughout almost a half a century of time. There is no comparison between the last roughly year or two of Biden content and everything literally before that. But people who believe that they want Joe Biden to be the president because of cognitive dissonance, because Orange Man bad, number one, and because Biden, therefore, good, number two, in their very dichotomous minds, they will not acknowledge that basic observable reality. The other problem is this, and this is a problem for Trump fans as well. It's a problem for anyone who has any sort of fanhood or stock in a candidate. This is one of the most important things that you have to get past if you're going to analyze politics. You want to be accurate. You got to try to learn how to shelve your own bias, push it to the back burner. One of the biggest problems within politics is that once a person develops that sort of fanhood, once they are part of an audience, a constituency or something like that, they get into the dichotomy element of things so strongly that they can't recognize reality in many cases for the way it really is. Like, you could have a candidate, let's say I could support candidate A, you support candidate B. Candidate A says something that is completely out of lockstep with what they've been proclaiming. They do a total 180, they do a flip-flop like a John Kerry thing or something. I may choose to just ignore it completely while holding the other candidate to a totally different standard. And this happens with literally everybody in politics. It happens with third-party candidates too. It doesn't even have to be a real dichotomy. You can set up an artificial dichotomy and say, well, the two parties are both authoritarian, I'm a libertarian, there's your dichotomy. Yep, but you've just set up a dichotomy. It happens to be a more tangible and real one, but it still leads to that same basic mentality, now doesn't it? And so when you get an LP candidate who's saying, well, yeah, this censorship of hate speech is such a great thing, completely incommensurate with the basic spirit of the founding of the First Amendment or of libertarianism as an ideology, cognitive dissonance kicks in. Oh, well, yeah, but it's just private censorship. It's not, the founders didn't take stock of Facebook. True. But ideologically, it's an inconsistency now, isn't it? And this happens all the time. Cognitive dissonance applies to virtually everybody who has any sort of strong feelings on politics. That's why during a debate, don't bother appealing to your opponent. Don't bother appealing to the people that believe in your opponent. 99% of them are never going to be swayed no matter what you do. People that are on the fence that have less strong feelings are the only people that you should be talking to during a debate. Debate 101. Easy tactic. Easy win for those of you out there. Most people, they get so personally involved in it, they're not capable of doing that. That's what separates a person who's capable of debating from someone who just, they'll talk themselves in circles, they're really not affecting anything, they become a demagogue or so forth. That's what happens. But there is an alternate reality there. No, Donald Trump does not think coronavirus is a hoax, never did. That quote is not real. It's completely out of context. It was about the Democrats' sayings about his response. That's what he was calling a hoax. He is not entirely untrue in that when he points that out, because of course at the time they were saying to people, don't worry about things. Technically speaking, if there was any lack of response, it was by the Democrats up until the middle of March when everyone began to freak out and buy all the toilet paper in the world. Wipe your ass with an owl. There's nothing else to do it with. Use tree bark. Please avoid the poison oak. The poison ivy. Oh no, and you can't go to the hospital. Just think about that, because, you know, everything was closed off and everyone was going nuts and wearing fucking hazmat suits. I literally saw someone in a homemade hazmat suit at one point because the panic got so bad. And this is an area where people are less panic prone than in many parts of the U.S., certainly. I've noticed that. I'm very thankful for that as well at the time. Trump never called Nazis very fine people. It never happened. But the average Biden fan thinks it did. And even when confronted with objective proof that the quote is out of context and means 180 from the reality of what was actually said and intoned, cognitive dissonance. They will completely shut down. They will ignore it entirely and default to, well, Trump is a bigot. Yeah, okay, yeah, whatever. Well, you're just defending Hitler. It's really funny to see that now, isn't it? That's about all. Peace out.